Chapter 6. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money. And he went for me, too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same, and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckoned I'd go now, just to spite Pap. That law trial was slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it, so every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk, and every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town, and every time he raised Cain around town, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much. So she told him that at last that if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. But wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me, and took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff, and crossed over to Illinois shore, where it was woody and there weren't no houses, but an old log hut in a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time, and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun, which I reckon he stole, and we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me up and went down into town, the store over the ferries, and traded fish and game for whiskey, and fetched it home, and got drunk, and had a good time, and licked me. The widow, she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try to get a hold of me. But Pap drove him off with the gun. And it weren't long after till I was used to being where I was. And I kind of got to like it. All but the cowhiding part. It was kind of lazy and jolly, laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more went along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt. And I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate, and comb up, and go to bed, and get up regular, and be forever bothering over a book, and have old Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it, but now I took to it again because Pap had no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods there, take it all around. But by and by, Pap got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much, and locking me in, too. Once he locked me in and was gone for 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he'd got drowned, and I wasn't ever going to get out no more. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There weren't a big window big enough for a dog to get through. Couldn't get up the chimney, too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away, and I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it, because it was about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid up in between the rafter and the clapboard to the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin beneath the table, to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised a blanket and went to work to saw a section of a big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting toward the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of any signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap came in. Pap weren't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. He said his lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if we ever got started on the trial. But then there was a ways to put that off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed just how to do it. And he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable, because I didn't want to go back to the widow any more, be so cramped up and civilized, as they called it. Then the old man got to cussing, and cussed everything and everybody he could think of, and he cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any. And after that he polished off with a kind of general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's-his-name when he got to them, and went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he'd note of a place 6 or 7 miles off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped, and they couldn't find me. And that made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned I wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch things he'd got. There's a 50-pound sack of cornmeal, a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I towed it up a load and went back and sat down on the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with the gun, get some lines, take the woods, and when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across the country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and so get so far away that the old man nor the widow could never find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying, till the old man hollered and asked whether I was asleep or drowned. I got the things up to the cabin, and then it was about dark, and while I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two, sort of got warmed up, and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body wouldn't have thought he was Adam. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor began to work, most ways he went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's a law standing ready to take a man's son away from him. A man's own son, which he has had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yeah, just as that man got that son raised at last and ready to go to work and begin to do something for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. That ain't nothing, either. The law backs up that old Judge Thatcher and helps him keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards and jams him into a little trap of a cabin like this, and lets him go around in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. And they call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I have a mighty notion just to leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher so, to his face. Lots of them heard me. They can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents, I'd blame leave the country and never come near it again. Them's the very words I says. Look at my hat, if you can call it a hat. But just the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin. And it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a jint of stovepipe. Look at it, says I. Such a hat for me to wear, one of the wealthiest men in this town, if I could get my rights. Oh yes, this is a wonderful government, wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free nigger there from Ohio, a mulatter, most as white as a white man, had the whitest shirt you ever did see, too, and the shiniest hat. And there ain't a man in that town that got such fine clothes as what he had. He had a gold watch and chain and a silver-headed cane. Awfulest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in a college, and could talk all kinds of languages, and knowed everything. And ain't that just the worst? They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what's the country a-coming to? It was election day, and I was just about to go and vote myself. I weren't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that nigger vote, I draw it out. I says I'd never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me, and the country may not go for it. But I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see the cool way of that nigger, why, he wouldn't have given me the road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up for auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they told me he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the state for 6 months. And he ain't been there that long yet. There. Now, that's a specimen. They call that a government. You can't sell a free nigger till he's been in the state for 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government. And lets on to be a government. And thinks it is a government. And yet got to set stock still for 6 whole months before they can take a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free nigger. And Pap was going on, so he never even noticed when his old limber legs was taken out to him. So he went over head over heels over the tub of pork salt and barked both shins, and spent the rest of his speech, which was all the hottest kind of language, mostly Hobart the nigger, and the government, though we give the tub some too, all along, here and there, hopped around the cabin considerable. First on one leg, and then the other, holding first one shin and then the other. And at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. That weren't good judgment, because that was a booty he'd had a couple of toes leaking out of most end of. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise. And down he went in the dirt and rolled there and held his toes, and the cussing he done then laid over everything he'd ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Sal Barry Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him too. But I reckon that was sort of piling things on, maybe. After supper, Pap took the jug, and he said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged that we'd be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key, or saw myself out, one or the other. He drank and tumbled down his blankets banging blind by. But luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep. It was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed around this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open all if I could. And so before I knowed what was about, I was sound asleep and the candle was burning. I don't know how long I was there asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream and I was looking up. There was Pap looking wild and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream, say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started to run around the cabin, hollering, "Take him off! Take him off! He's biting my neck!" I never see a man so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all fagged out, fell down panting. Then he rolled over wonderful fast, kicking the things every which way and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands, screaming and hollering that there was devils a hold of him. He wore out by and by and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller. He didn't make a sound. And I could hear the owls and the wolves way off in the woods. And it seemed terrible still. He was laying over by the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened. And with his head to one side, he says, very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp. That's the dead. Tramp, tramp, tramp. They're coming for me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me. Don't. Hands off. The cold. Let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." And he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone. He rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a-begging, and then he went to crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped up on his feet, looking wild. He see me and went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death, saying he would kill me, and I wouldn't come for him for no more. And I begged and told him I was only old Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh, and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me. Once, when I turned short and dodged under his arm, He made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders. I thought I was gone, but I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the door. Said he would rest a minute and then kill me. Put his knife under him, and he would say that he would sleep and get strong. Then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easy as I could, not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down it to make sure it was loaded, and I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing it towards Pap, and sat down behind it to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along.